Hi, this is Peter Teuscher. I'm here with Toby Demker. Thanks for joining us for another podcast where we choose a range of topics from personal development, professional development, and a little bit of philosophy. We pick a topic and see where the conversation takes us. So, how are you doing today, Toby?
I'm doing, very good, thank you.
Yeah, you
Kind of
just
mid holidays, mid vacation time, so
yeah, great.
pretty relaxed. Yeah.
Yeah, you and I both. I was off for a week. My brother was over from Canada, and we had a little visit in Spain, which was nice. And so that's why we've missed a week. We skipped a week on our normally scheduled programming. Would have aired last week, but so for anyone who has noticed, that's the reason why.
Mm.
So anyway, it looks like today is our 40th episode. So obviously we post these normally every 2 weeks. Started at the beginning of last year, and so we're on episode 40. It's great. We're
That's
accumulating some stuff here.
worth celebrating.
Yeah, yeah. So and it's great. I keep getting some feedback from. Although our YouTube channel just remains really tiny,
Mm.
the people who listen to our podcast is growing, and got a comment from Canada recently, and so it's great that people around the world get to have a listen and find some value in it. So
Yeah,
that's what it's all about.
yeah, definitely.
Cool. So I've picked a topic today, my turn to pick, and I'd like to talk today about the inner voice. And it's interesting because we all have, whether we're aware of it or not, the inner chatter. There's actually a book from Michael Singer, the Untethered Soul, and he talks about the inner narrator. So he
Mm.
comments on how everything we're experiencing, there's also this narrator. You
Mm.
have those movies where you see the action, but there's a voice narrating everything along the way.
Exactly. Yeah. Mm.
And a lot of us have this, and it's interesting. You talk to people sometimes, and they admit to you, yeah, I got this voice, and it just seems very strange, but you realize that everyone has it. And I was talking to someone about this at a workshop,
Mm.
and I was telling him, I was in Switzerland, and this has really happened. So I was in Switzerland on a ski trip with my aunt and uncle. Who were quite young, and so anyway, we were sitting at dinner at this table. So my aunt and uncle and my cousin, and there's this guy behind me, and he's like complaining, and he's I'm like, oh geez, I was thinking to myself, because my back was to him, I was thinking, I'd hate to be the person sitting with him, right? Because they're not getting a word in. He's just doing all the talking, and he's just negative and complaining.
Mm.
And then my uncle was like looking oddly over at the guy, and then so I looked over my shoulder, and he was sitting by himself. So
Mm.
don't misunderstand me. I'm not making light of the fact that this guy clearly, that there was whatever the mental condition is, where he just lost the filter to filter out his inner dialogue, and he verbalized everything. So I'm not
Mm.
trying to make light of it, but the thing that I tried to explain to this person at this workshop is, you know we think someone like that is strange because they're vocalizing all of their inner talk, and
Yeah.
yet
Mm.
all of that, we all do that. What
Yeah.
he is
Mm.
verbalizing, all got going on in our heads, right? And
Mm.
so that's why that's something I really want to make clear to anyone listening, is that you're not alone if you've got this constant voice in your head. And
Mm.
so I think it's that's why I thought it was an important thing to talk about today, because
Mm.
there are so many. Well, there are things you can, especially if that voice is really negative, and really identifying different aspects of it, and so on. So that's kind of what I
Mm.
want to get into today. Yeah, what's your
Yeah, interesting.
experience?
I mean, just thought, but immediately with that story, when you mentioned the word unfiltered as well, how we deal, what kind of filters do we put on ourselves, and how can we, well, place them there or replace them, or take a look behind the filters to kind of unfilter that inner voice. And when you're talking about inner voice, for me, I'm thinking like of a an old Donald Duck cartoon or something. You always get these cartoons where you have a devil on one shoulder and an angel
Yeah.
on the other shoulder. They're telling you different stories. And I'm I just think it's interesting with that inner voice of how it can be something that can create a lot of energy and make you do stuff and take risks and chances and exciting, you know. And at the other hand, it can also be a real sort of break on things, like to stopping you from doing things, to be that inner critic that we've talked about a lot about before, you know, your self-doubt, you can't do it. So what kind of story is your inner voice or that narrator telling you? And yeah, it's funny to think about if you're in a situation and if it was a movie, you know, what would that storyteller say? You know?
Yeah.
And that gives you, just thinking about that gives you a little bit of a power. So what is the story that you want to be involved in here, you know? I think that's it's a really interesting sort of way to think about any kind of action or any situation that you might want to be in or that you might want to get out of, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's, I think when you, I like, you know, that you're pointing out when you talked about the cartoons where you've got the angel and the devil, one on each shoulder. I think, you know, as a systemic coach, so working systemically and looking at things from a systemic perspective, you know, you can break things down. You know, we talk about the inner critic. Some people will talk about, some psychologists will talk about the inner child. I've worked with coaching clients, and sometimes, you know, even though it may just be that these are different kind of states that you get into, emotional states, and they get you thinking a certain way, or they're kind of like a mode of thinking. But I've found it even helpful working, if we're doing like some systemic work with a client, even labeling the different voices, you know, giving them, you know, sometimes I've seen this as well. There's this is going way back, but you know, in cartoons where there's like a quorum, you know, there's like a little group in your head trying to go, no, I want control now, I want control,
Yeah.
and so and I'm not saying from a psychological perspective that's necessarily the way it is, although. One of the trainers I had way back in when I first did my systemic coaching training, he said, you know, there are different elements, and there's no getting rid of any of those elements. You know, you just got to learn to work in harmony with them. So you know, your voice can be coming from different aspects of your personality, and so one aspect of listening to the inner voice is to recognize, you know, what part of me is this? So, you know, the inner child has certain needs that it's trying to express, and a lot of times it's more of an emotion than it is a language. But the inner critic is a big one for me. You know, with this commentary on everything I do, and then a criticism of it, right? Oh, that was so dumb. That was so, you know, and so recognizing when that inner critic is active. We also have an inner judge, and that usually is outward driven. So, you know, oh, look at that. You know, some women will go, internal dialogue, look at that outfit, that's so ridiculous, or something. You know, at least that's what I take from the one or two episodes of Sex and the City I saw in the past. Anyway, but it's you know, we have these different elements of our personality, and they contribute to this inner dialogue. And so it's important to recognize that. I think this is the big point that one of the big points I want to share today is that, you know, just because it's a thought doesn't make it true, you know, and just because it's this inner comment. And so I think one of the main things I want to get to as we have this discussion today is that you can challenge that inner voice. We often just let it kind of roll, right? It can, all the criticisms coming and all the judgments and all the commentary and the analysis, and you know, it doesn't make it true. Just because it's a thought and it's kind of expressing itself, you know, you can push back on it. And I as we go on, I'll talk a little about some of the things that I use in order to combat the you know, the whether it's the inner critic or some of those negative voices. And I think that's the issue, that a lot of this commentary, you know, I will go for a walk and wow, what a beautiful day, and you know, I really love this. But if you think about it, how much of that inner narrator, how much of that dialogue is actually positive, right? A lot of it
Mm,
is pretty negative. It's critical, it's
mm,
judgmental,
mm,
it's looking for the danger and trying to protect yourself from it. I think
mm.
from an evolutionary perspective. So I don't know
Yeah.
what your view is on that.
Well, I kind of connected a little bit to something that we talked about in some previous conversations when we talked about roles. Just thinking about what kind of role you are in, and in that case, like a coaching situation for me is like who, if I'm coaching a client, I would like who is saying that, which in what role is saying that, because that can be if you're taking the your inner voice as a mother or as a professional or as a football coach or as a citizen or whatever it is, they're going to be saying different things in different situations. And just thinking about, so if I'm a parent or if I'm a professional, I look at things very, very differently. I have different sort of priorities and expectations on things. And that would perhaps let me be much more critical towards a person in a professional sense rather than as a parent, right? So, who is saying this and what is the situation? And we can very I think that's fantastic as well that we can so quickly sort of go between these different voices, but being able to ask that question. So who is saying this at this moment? I think that's one way to work with it, and I think that creates a little bit of clarity of what's actually going on here. What are my expectations? And the other thing is, um, and I think we talked about this before, sort of the intuitive mind and the rational mind,
Hmm.
but that gut feeling. Like, so what is your gut feeling telling you about this? What is your gut feeling saying? For me, that's also always really sort of go-to question. Um, I rely quite heavily on my intuition, I guess, but
Me too.
I very often ask myself that question. So what is my gut feeling saying here? And that gives me a hint of where the conflict might be in the decision making or in the narrative, as you say, that my rational mind, my intuitive mind is kind of saying different things, and I can't decide what is most important. So just being able to look at these filters, taking them away, looking at them, swapping them around a little bit, creating some clarity around who's saying what, for me, I think that's very, very helpful.
Yeah, that's a that's a really good point, and I think it's good that you point out this sort of this intuitive language of feelings, right? Because sometimes we have these thoughts, which also generate a feeling in us, and then we have this gut feeling, and the two kind of make things very confusing, right? Because you've got
Mm,
these contrasting feelings. I think finding looking at the source is really interesting. Like what part of you is, when I will talk to people who have like self doubt or this sense of imposter syndrome,
mm,
and trying to where is that coming from, right?
mm,
And it could be this part of you that's just trying to keep you safe from failure. Don't bite off more than you can chew, sort of thing. Don't take on too much because you might fail, right? So understanding where it's coming from and what the needs of that part of your personality or that role or whatever, what needs is that trying to fulfill, right?
mm,
And a lot
mm,
of times it's safety and security, or it's due to certain fears ingrained from past experiences. And so that's where recognizing where that voice is coming from is super helpful, because then you can address it. It's when we overlook or try to ignore or distract ourselves from, the feeling or what that where that voice is coming from, what fear is behind that. When we try and just over distract ourselves to deal with it rather than addressing it, that's when it can become overwhelming and can really plague us for longer periods.
mm. Yeah, but being able to sort of play around with it and just identifying it and choosing. Again, it's about that choice, right? Being able to eventually choose what is the voice that you want to listen to, and taking a little bit of control of what is the voice that you want to be listening to or to be telling you right now. But I also have to say, I mean, to be frank here, sometimes for me it's great to be able to blow some steam and just think, ridiculous negative thoughts, that are not creative whatsoever. Like, oh, this is so stupid, or look at that silly dress, or whatever it might be. Sometimes I think that can be helpful as well. I mean, it can just be it can be nice to sort of blow some steam, and we don't have to be all that what I call outcome creative all the time. It's great if we can, but sometimes it's nice to just be a little bit silly, I guess.
Absolutely, and I think that's the great thing, that our thoughts are private. We can explore all sides of ourselves, and we can, the great thing is that, as long as you're aware of it, you can kind of follow and see where your thoughts go, and you can be kind of like you say, you can even be kind of mean, or like well, they would be mean if you express them externally, but you can
Exactly,
play with
right.
ideas, and you can just like that little kid that has a tantrum and then says mean things that they don't really mean, and then they feel bad about it afterwards. But you can do all that internally without
Yeah.
sort of injuring anyone, without hurting anyone's feelings.
Mm.
And I agree with you. So I think that can be really fun, as long as you're not doing it all the time. It's about looking at what portion of your thoughts is focused on this negative stuff, and
Mm.
what is focused on the positive and the optimism and the opportunity, right? So
Exactly, yeah. And I think it's the crucial thing here is just to be really aware of, when is this coming up? How is it serving you? So how is this voice that you're choosing to listen to serving you? And being aware of that, you can choose. Because I mean, as I said, sometimes I think it's nice and silly and fun to be a little bit on the negative side of things, just to kind of blow some steam and just laugh about it. But I think it's important to be really cautious about being creating a habit around that,
yeah,
and sort of doing it per automatique all the time. That can become a real danger, right?
yeah, yeah.
So
I think that a perfect example of that is, and which is getting a lot of criticism now, but a lot of comedians, they
mm,
point out these ridiculous things, or I mean, that's what makes it funny. It's true, but it's ridiculous,
yeah,
and so that's why I think it's, as you say, and I hadn't thought about this, but I'm glad you pointed out. It's fine to kind of be able to let that stuff out, and look at the ridiculousness of life, or the without kind of, and kind of being able to laugh at yourself and others internally, but not in a mean-spirited way, right? So
exactly, yeah,
so I think comedy is a great example of that, and if you
yeah.
can have a bit of that comedy in your own mind, that's, I think, a very healthy thing.
Mm,
I think that for me, the thing that I wanted to help people address is when that narrator or the voice tends to remain fairly negative all the time, right? And
yeah.
there's a recent book from Dr. Ethan Kross, and he refers to the negative inner talk, or the negative voice, as chatter, and so his book's called
Mm.
Chatter.
Yeah.
And so this can be a real problem when, I mean, it can lead to more serious mental health issues, depression, but for people who it hasn't pushed that far, it can still put you in a bad mood. I sometimes wonder what's going on in people's heads when I'm taking a walk. Like, I'm very fortunate to live right near a very green area. So, like, for me, out my front door, and in 2 minutes, I'm in trees, greenery, little river,
Mm.
and when the sun is shining, and birds are singing, and I just I can feel I got a smile on my face, and I encounter people that are scowling, and I look around, and I'm like, what's going on in that head of yours that's
Mm.
making you look so? And of course, that's just my interpretation. Maybe that's just their neutral expression, but they really look like they're unhappy, and then sometimes you'll even hear people complaining and bickering about things. I'm like, on a day like today, how can you be put in that mood? And
Mm.
so obviously I've done a lot of personal development. So fortunately, as much as I do have a strong inner critic, I find I still have a level of positivity that I can embrace, and I can live in the moment and be present. But I think this is the issue that a lot of people have. When you look at that I've seen research everywhere from like the amount of thoughts that we have per day, anywhere from 7,000 to 70,000. But the one thing that people have a consensus on is that most of those thoughts tend to be negative. And it's those negative thinking habits, right, that express themselves then in that inner voice that we have. And so
Mm.
a lot of it is habitual. I think complaining is a habit. Complaining is
Mm.
a habit we get into. We look at things and we look at the problem and the challenge, and then we complain about it, or we look at what things are wrong in the world. And
Mm.
so it's kind of where do you orient yourself? What's your point of reference, right?
Mm. Yeah, actually, like one one example that is really real for me, I mean, is when I go running. You know that I do a lot of long runs,
Yeah.
and especially if I'm doing a really long run, I mean the amount of thoughts and stories and voices that go around during one of those sessions, it's amazing. And some of them are like, oh, you can do this is great, oh, this is wonderful to be able to do this, until I can't take another step, why am I doing this is so stupid, I'm it's the range of topics and ideas that go through your head is just amazing. So that's actually one exercise that I would really encourage people to do, is to, I guess it has to be a run because it has to be a little bit physical. It has to be a little bit of a challenge to it. But the next time you go for a run, just be aware of your voices that's going through your mind during that distance. I mean, in the beginning, it might be very positive and easy, and in the middle it might be very tough. Towards the end is probably going to be very very different because you're getting to the end. But just be creating some awareness of what are the different voices and stories that are going through your mind in that half hour or 1 hour or 2 hours, or doesn't matter how long it is. So it's really interesting when you think about it that way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought it up because I was going to ask you, because I know you do triathlons and marathons and stuff like that, and I've heard from people. I'm trying to save my knees to extend my basketball, playing days as long as possible. But so for me, I'm happy with a 5K run, but I know you do much longer runs than that. But I've heard from people who do marathons, for example, that as much as there's physical pain involved, one of the biggest barriers is the mental, overcoming that mental voice that's telling you, I can't go any further, I'm not going to make it.
Mm.
This is, I'm crazy. Why did I why did I try why did I set out to do this, and so on. So what's your method then for overcoming that when you're doing like if you're doing a triathlon, which I'm in awe of people who manage that,
Mm.
and so how do you get through it?
Well, I think a lot of it comes from experience. I think that it is possible, and even if you have the experience of doing a few, you know that you'll get a second wind or maybe a third wind or fourth wind, etc. So, I mean, it you go through stages, and you just have to be prepared for that. But then when that voice is kicking in, then just being aware of that. Okay, it's really tough night right now, and I'm listening to a voice that is not very very positive, but trying to think, okay, if I can just, okay, thinking positive, let's take it another few kilometers and see what it feels like. And then all of a sudden the sun starts shining, and and you start getting energy again, or things happen, and a lot of things can happen during that period of time. So it's just trying to think positively, taking in energy for what's going on around you, and actually a lot from participants that are around you, that are you're competing against or with, or whatever you want to call it. But that can give you a lot of energy as well. from people cheering on and just bird singing but just being aware of that. Sometimes your mind goes into that you're listening to that voice that, oh no, it's only tough, it's only negative, but if I just endure a little bit longer, I might start enjoying some of the things that are around me, and then you start doing that, and then it becomes easy again. But that roller coaster is really interesting when you can take a step back.
Yeah,
When you're in those valleys, if we want to call it, of course it's tough, but with experience, you can start to notice that kind of pattern, and that's really cool.
yeah, that's one of the things that I recommend to people is to become that observer, not to, and anyway, one of the things that I was going to get into and talk about in terms of, dealing with the inner voice is meditation. I know it's kind of my fix all for mental stuff, but meditation's an interesting one because it's becoming the observer of your thoughts, right? And if you can observe them, then you can discern between which thoughts am I going to follow and pursue. But I have, when I go for a run and I'm not really feeling up to, and I'm not sure how much farther I can go, I'll say, there's that tree on my run. I'm going to get to that point and then I can stop. And then when I get to the tree, I'm still feeling fine. And so, okay, well, and then I set these short goals for myself as I go. And I find I'm easily able to, to pass that goal and to go on to the next one and the next one. And so breaking it down into smaller pieces is really helpful for me. But it's not just running, because there'll be days when I'm doing my yoga practice where I'll be, I'll be cursing in my head. I'll be going, I'll be, geez, my balance is so terrible today. Why can't I do these standing positions? And I'll really get frustrated with myself, and then I have to go back into my breath and find my center and and let go of that negative inner voice. So it's not just running. And I when I play basketball, sometimes that my inner voice is the biggest obstacle, more than the best defender on the other team or anything else. My inner voice is my biggest obstacle when I play basketball, because I miss a couple of shots and then all of a sudden it's like I'm the worst guy on the floor. I can't hit a shot. Why do I even still play this sport? There's a ton of, then my inner critic gets really, really loud in my head, and that's one of the biggest challenges that I face when I play basketball. So, and I think with athletes, when the really successful athletes, this is something I used to tell the kids that I coached in Canada. Obviously back then, I think Michael Jordan's still a name that everybody recognizes, but now there are other, professionals that are more relevant for a lot of young people. But back then it was like, what was the difference between Michael Jordan and the last guy on the bench? You typically have 14, 15 players on a team. And so, the guys who don't get any playing time at the end of the bench, what's the difference between them and Michael Jordan? Because to get into at a professional level, to get into the National Basketball Association, the NBA, in the U.S., in order to get into that league, your level of fitness has to be so high. Your level of skill has to be incredibly high. So, you wouldn't even be playing unless you had, and so, the difference between them is, Michael Jordan believed he could hit every shot. He believed he could beat anyone. It was just his mental fortitude. Obviously he had a lot of skill and he had, he had a lot of, but the thing that differentiated him from a lot of other players, he wasn't the tallest guy. He wasn't I don't know if he was the fastest guy. He certainly could jump high, but I think, the mental part of it is what far and away set him himself apart from others. And then, Kobe Bryant, rest in peace. He obviously passed away a couple of years ago, but he's another guy. They talk about the Mamba mentality, right? He was the Mamba, the Black Mamba, and so it's just you can't underestimate when you get that mental fortitude, when you can control that inner voice and really shift it to being positive and supportive, and that's when you just really can achieve a lot of your potential. And another thing that I like to talk about, I wrote a blog years ago about this, about self-parenting. If you were to treat yourself, if you were to get that voice to start talking, and I don't know what your parents were like. My parents were fairly old school in their discipline and so on. But if you think of the ideal parent, right? How would, if you are a parent, so I'm not a parent, so I don't speak from experience, but you want to be firm, but you want to be supportive, and you want to try and help your child get to the reach their own potential and so on. And I think if you can train that inner voice to talk to yourself like the best possible parent you could imagine, right? Someone who's supportive but firm, but doesn't let you give up, but still gives you a lot of positive reinforcement and love and so on. I think that giving yourself enough love is something that a lot of people struggle with, right? So that's another thing that I wanted to recommend to people, that inner parenting.
Yeah, cool. I guess I think about that, but maybe not in those words a lot. But yeah, that makes a lot of sense. The thing that I was thinking about was, and we've talked a lot about meetings, and I think I brought up a topic about meeting management before, but I think that's a really interesting also platform to think about what your inner voices are, what kind of voices you're hearing, because in a meeting you're going to have different roles, and some are you're going to be very active, some of them you're going to be very passive perhaps, but just then what are your inner voices telling you about when you're sitting in these meetings? Like, it can be just about this is so boring,
what's the commentary,
what am I doing here? No, that's so stupid, until this is great. I mean, I wish I could participate more, and just choosing the narrative that is going to serve you.
Exactly.
And it comes back to this question here, is like, what by listening to this voice, what purpose is it serving? Right? By listening to this voice, what purpose is that serving? And just thinking about, well, what is it? It comes back to that purpose again. What is it that you want to achieve in this situation, and how is this helping you? So what is the voice that could actually sort of direct you in that direction to the most possible extent? So yeah, I mean, for me in meetings, it's a lot of things go into my mind. Like, how am I going to be perceived in this meeting? How much space do I want to take? When you're facilitating a workshop, I mean, there's so many voices that goes through your head, because you have to think about the process, the participants, the things that you want to say, etc. So, balancing out that, and just thinking, well, what is the purpose? How can I best serve the purpose, and what voice will sort of best serve that purpose?
Yeah, in those situations, I mean, you want to have a lot of self-awareness, but not be overly fixated on yourself, right? This balance of this looking inward, being self-aware, but also aware of the situation. I think that's something as facilitators and trainers that we, that's really important, even in a coaching session. It's, am I too much in the analysis, or am I listening properly? Am I hearing what that person is saying?
Exactly,
what's their body language? And so that this being able to balance the what the inner voice is saying, what your inner processes are doing, and what's happening in the external world, I think is really, really quite important. I totally agree with you there. There was something else I was going to comment on, and I lost myself now. But I agree with you that the whole thing about in the meetings, or in any situation, or sometimes when you're having a discussion with friends and you're not present, or you're having an argument with someone and you kind of get lost in all this, rather than trying to understand what the other person is saying, and you just you've got this running commentary, and you're just waiting to be able to let it out on that person as soon as there's a break, that you have the opportunity. So I think having a strong awareness of a balance of awareness of what's going on outside and what's going on inside is super important.
Yeah, it's not easy though.
No,
No.
No, it's
And
not.
it's all about I guess I've been thinking and reading a lot about this the metacognition or thinking about
Mm,
thinking. And it's really related to that, right? So to be able to think about what it's thinking about your thinking patterns or thinking about your the voice. I mean, we can define it in different ways, I guess, but your voices might illustrate your thinking patterns and just being creating some awareness about that. And then it seems like a lot of very successful and smart people, they are able to choose very wisely, what kind of thinking pattern will serve them best in different situations, and sort of choosing from that toolbox. But that, I think it takes a lot of training, and you're probably never going to be, or we're never going to be to 100%, but just think about it and creating more habits around that.
yeah, I think it's important to recognize which state you're in because, obviously I talked about this before when you're looking at the different, um, was looking at things systemically. You can call it roles, you can call it different parts of your personality, different inner voices, but it also relates to the state that you're in. The state you're in will put you in a different mode, right, in a different role. And so just recognizing your state is really important. But I think people with a lot of experience, they slow things down. I know really good basketball players, they slow the game down and they can process it at a different speed to everyone else,
Mm.
and make it easier to see and recognize those things.
Mm.
So I think you're right about that, having that level of awareness. And I come back to, this is why meditation is super helpful, because when you're in a meditative state, you become the observer of you find distance between your thoughts, distance between what you're feeling in your body. And I think that happens, like, we've talked before about getting into the flow state. I'm a big fan
Mm.
of Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's work, and
Mm.
and that whole flow thing, and it is a lot about just finding that separation, and when you recognize that you're not your thoughts, or what you were saying before about the questioning some of those thoughts that are coming through, like Eckhart Tolle says, you can just ask yourself, is that so? Is that so?
Mm.
And that, I think that even goes back to the ancient Greeks when they questioned everything. And you can do that for yourself. Is that questioning the voice in your head? Is that true?
Man.
Is that a fact? Is that reality? Right? And I
Mm.
think when you start to push back on that voice in your head, that's when you can start to take more control. But I think the first step is to separate yourself from it and recognize. You can recognize things like, that, well, I'm not those thoughts. That's not me. And then you can recognize, where's that coming from? What needs
Mm.
does that voice have? And I think that level of awareness is a big first step. And
Mm.
then from there, so today I wanted to talk about the two tools, and the one I've already mentioned is meditation, getting into that observer state.
Mm.
The other thing is, let's face it, the thoughts in our head are just, the voice in the head are just thoughts, right? And
Mm.
so when we have these habitual thoughts, one of the really powerful tools that I use with clients, and which I've used for myself, is affirmations. And it's funny because I used to think affirmations were ridiculous. Back in the
Mhm.
early 90s, there was this, Saturday Night Live, popular American show.
Yeah.
Don't live there anymore, so I don't know how popular it is now, but it certainly was very popular in the day. And there was this character called Stuart Smalley, and it was played by Al Franken, and he would sit in front of the mirror and he would say things like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, or doggone it, people like me. And that just seemed so ridiculous to me. But then people like Louise Hay, I started reading some of her things, and when you start to apply things, it can really change. It's just like, marketing, right? So you hear things enough times, You hear a lie enough times, you'll start to believe it. But you hear these repeated messages. That's what advertisers try and do. They try and get the message out there as many times and get it into your head. And so the same thing is if you can shift the message through these affirmations. And I have a very specific technique that I use. And so when I work with clients, I'll get them to make a statement, right? So I'll get them to pick out, so what are kind of the standard negative thoughts that you have about a particular topic, subject? And then we'll look at those, and then I'll go, let's create a statement that is counter to that, like it's the opposite. And then the important thing is the statement needs to be in positive. It can't be like something like I'm not that, or I never do that. It has to be in the positive. I am this. I can do. And so it needs to be in the positive. It needs to be believable to the person saying it. So sometimes to say, I am wealthy, or I am talented, or what, that doesn't feel like it's true. If it doesn't feel believable, then you can work it down to something like, I believe I have the possibility to be good. I believe with enough work I could, so you just kind of tone it down to a point where you feel it's believable. And then once you have the statement, then every time these thoughts come up in your head, you start to repeat this mantra, right? You repeat this statement. And then what I have found, and what, working with my clients, they've reported back to me, is that over time, those negative thoughts will fade away. And they'll all of a sudden have this they'll feel better, and that new statement has then become internalized. And the things that we internalize influence are, these nudges, that's another great book, Nudge, and they use these psychological nudges to get people to change their behavior. But you can do that for yourself, right? It creates the impulses that you have will be, the things you internalize will affect the impulses you have and the decisions you make. And so that's the way I use affirmations, and I think it's a really good way to train your brain, to train your inner voice to think differently. It challenges those negative voices that you have in your head, and it gives you a new, more positive perspective. And it's not meant to be naive, stick your head in the sand, this is a bad situation, I'll try and pretend it's a good one. It's about shifting your perspective and seeing the solution rather than just looking at the problem.
Yeah, that's great. That's right. And I guess, looking at, if as an example, when we talked about running before, that's something that you can create for yourself, these kind of affirmations that when you've done something that I can do this, or I've run this bar before, I believe that I can, this self-talk, and just when you need to, you can sort of infuse that into your system, and then that can support you. But yeah, that's great to have that possibility to create these kind of statements that can be supportive for you. And I think a lot of people do that intuitively, but at certain situations, I think we definitely need some help to realize, what are the statements that can help us.
Yeah, and it's because the thoughts that we have tend to be so repetitive. And so when you recognize negative thoughts or a negative voice in your head that repeats the same things over and over, that has the same practiced response to certain situations, then, actually Joe Dispenza has a book, Changing the Habit of Being Yourself. I think that's the title. I hope I haven't misquoted it. But he talks about how we have a practiced way of being and a practiced way of responding to emotions, to situations, and that creates a physical, that creates a chemistry in your brain, in your body, and then you that's familiar to you when you repeat that again and again. And so I think we all have these, habitual ways of being and thinking, and those, once something's a habit, it can take time and can be difficult to change. And so that's why, we talk about the iceberg model or whatever, these things that we have to bring it to the surface, make it recognizable, address it, and then like one of my favorite mantras, awareness allows change. It just gives you the ability then to see it so that you can change it, right? So Yeah, so that's the way I approach it. That's the way I approach the inner voice. Any other tips? Any other things that you use?
I was just thinking about something else, but I think I kind of lost track of it there as well. No, I think yeah, I can't think of anything else right now.
Actually, I'm thinking
Mm.
because of the running and the sports and whatever, and I mentioned yoga before. I think the if you're really overwhelmed by your thoughts,
Mm.
and this goes back to meditation as well, but I think the thing is, the thing about yoga is about getting out of your mind and getting into the body, right? And that's why breathing is really important. Sometimes it'll be just a matter of pointing your point of attention at one point in the room, especially if you're trying to balance. For me, I have a practice, if I'm trying to stand straight or whatever, tree pose or whatever, I imagine myself, I'm a tree, I'm solid, I'm anchored into and visualizing things can be helpful. But I think when your thoughts are very overwhelming, that's why exercise is a great thing, because you
Mm.
get out of the mind and into the body. And I
Mm.
think that's when you're feeling really overwhelmed, that's great. Mantras are really great when sometimes for meditation, if the breathing isn't enough to calm me down for meditation, I'll have a mantra that really takes focus away from that inner voice, that chatter that's trying to distract me and take me into other areas of thought.
Mm.
And so there's lots of great tools there. I think for people who haven't had success with meditation, find a good meditation teacher. I mean, there's lots of great techniques.
Mm.
So yeah, I think there are tools there. I think the kind of final message for me is, if you have this really strong inner voice, know that everybody has it. You're not alone,
Mm.
and there are ways to confront it and say, no, that's not true, and
Yeah.
question, is that
Mm.
really true, and really raise some objections to that inner
Mm.
voice when it's really dominant.
Yeah, yeah, and that brought me back to to the thing that I was thinking about, these sort of micro pauses, right? To
Mm,
the ability to in in a stressed situation or in a situation where when you're might be under pressure or sort of expected to do act in some way, to take the ability to, well, to train yourself to take a micro pause. It's like, what's happening right now, and instead of just answering by per auto, sort of try to listen to what your inner voice is telling you, and to expand your range of options actually as well.
yeah.
And there's a book that I really like, The Art of Possibility by Benjamin and his wife Xander. And he's a conductor, so he
Oh,
always says that if something happens that is unexpected, just stop and think, how interesting. And it sounds silly, but that works for him. Just how, because it creates a little micro pause and like, okay, so how am I going to react to this right now? And that gives you, I mean, maybe it sounds a bit silly, but if I firmly believe that if you train yourself in creating these micro pauses, that just in a second or two, you can train your ability to listen to what your inner voice is telling you, and from that you can make a more conscious, better decision for yourself and the people around you. So that ability to just take that little pause, and actually my whole, my company is called LTC. It's all about that: listen, think, choose. So stop and just listen, and then you think about rationally what would be make sense to listening to your voice, and then take a choice, make your decision based on that. So,
yeah, that's a really, really good point. I think we talked before about, or when that reference to like comedians and stuff, sometimes it's just important to laugh at yourself. And I don't think, like, you have this stream of thoughts and you just let it run like a bad record in the background. And if you just stop and listen, you realize how ridiculous, and you can laugh at yourself. But also that pausing is really important. And that reminded me of Thich Nhat Hanh. He has this 3-step: pause, breathe, smile. And
mm,
that's actually on my screensaver on my
mm,
phone. But I think that's a great point. That's another really great thing that you can do to become more aware in the moment is take those micro pauses. I'm going to take that one. That's a really great suggestion, and it'll make you so much more aware. And when you can interrupt that constant stream of chatter in your mind, I think that those are the times, those little moments of awareness are the opportunities for change, right?
Mm. All right. Yeah, so that would be my my final point on the topic.
Fantastic. Okay, great. Toby, thanks for engaging with me on that, on my choice of topics for today. Thanks
Thanks. Yeah, it
everyone.
was a great
Yeah,
topic. Yeah.
fantastic. And thanks everyone for tuning in to listen again. I hope this has brought some new awareness, maybe some inspiration to change, and some helpful tips. So yeah, that's great. We'll leave it there today. Thanks everyone for joining us, and we will be back to you with another great topic next time. All right. See
All
you.
right. Thanks.
Bye bye.
Bye.